I think some people have probably been to a number of these. Some of you, this might be your first one. We're gonna give you the link to the deck, so you will just know exactly where we're going. We're going to encourage you to contribute there. We're going to encourage you to interact with one another by talking or by typing in that deck. And so is it, I will even just drop that in there right now. And as BT just showed you, the link to this broader program is also available there. Let's just get into it so we can get to intros. Amanda, do you mind moving us forward? Righto. Okay. Hey, everybody. We're very glad you're all here. Everybody here has something to do with not just computer science education, but developing or running PD or developing curriculum to support students around the United States or around the world in learning computer science. There's a number of people here that we're just going to do quick introductions. So hi, I am GT Roble. I'm a volunteer with CSTA. I am joined by other members of the CSTA PD provider team, including Jared may be here, Diane and Perry. We've been some of the main members involved in this program. Are folks here? I definitely see Jared. I think Diane may not have been able to join us today. We're very excited though to be able to get this group together. Today we have a special presentation from Dr. Richard Ladner from Access CS for All, and then the CSTA PD committee, a number of members are here, members of the CSTA organization, and we're delighted to be able to bring you all together today. I think we can go to the next slide there. Cool. So let's just talk really high level, some of the goals when we normally get together: community building, solving collective challenges. So today we're going to be focused on Standard 2, Equity and Inclusion, in the CSTA Standards for Computer Science Teachers. And specifically, we're going to be looking at 2E, use accessible instructional materials. We're going to be focusing on accessibility, evaluating tools and curricula, and leverage resources to improve accessibility for all students. And then this is just an opportunity to share best practices. Cool. So we're together for 2 hours. This is in Eastern time. In just a moment, we just said hello. We're going to put you all in breakout rooms. This is a great opportunity just to meet other people. So you're just going to meet a small number of your fellow curriculum and PD providers. You'll get a few minutes to do that. Afterwards, Dr. Ladner is going to give us a prepared presentation, 15 to 20 minutes, talking about accessibility. This is an area of deep expertise for Dr. Ladner, but he has prepared his comments, or he has thought about specifically how to address curriculum and PD providers. So we're very excited for that. And then there are going to be breakout discussions. So you'll actually note most of the time here is just spent talking to other people who do your job, or a job kind of like yours, developing PD, developing curriculum. So that's really exciting. The second half, we'll take a quick break. And then the second half is essentially going to be birds of a feather or unconference. So you're going to pick a topic of particular interest to you. Part of the goal here is just to bring together other people who do curriculum and PD development and learn from one another. So the first half, we normally pick a topic we plan a topic, and the second half we say we're going to let the community decide what they want to talk about. So that's how we'll spend these 2 hours together. Should be fun. We should learn a lot, hopefully build some connections, and that's how we'll be spending our time. You want to move us forward? Okay, here's a spiel about what we're doing here. I'll read it off. Curriculum and PD providers have a lot of power and influence over what's viewed as normal in the computer science classroom. The relatively few people who write curriculum or design PD, and so that means members of this group, have an outsized impact. So this group needs to learn, grow, ask questions, and build community in order to live up to the responsibilities of that impact. And then also, it's just fun. A lot of people here are probably curriculum or PD, I'm going to call it nerds, people who love education, who love computer science, who love thinking about the needs of students and teachers and maybe broader education systems. And it's cool to just talk to other people who care about those things. Um, Today, we do want to push ourselves out of some of the practical constraints that often define PD and curriculum design and think big. So reality will always pull us back, but today we want to aspire to make a world for our students and teachers that looks more like the vision we have in our heads and hearts. So we hope you'll join us today in being curious, idealistic, reflective. We're really looking forward to learning together and hope that the conversations we start today continue through the year. So yeah, I mean, all of us are often used to having to be experts. We're either developing curriculum, we are running PD, and there aren't as many spaces for us to say, I don't always have all the answers, or what we do is difficult, or I need to do trade-offs, and some of those can be challenging. And so before we get started, the overall challenge we have is just to come to these conversations with some curiosity, maybe a little bit of idealism, and let's learn from one another. And we're really excited to spend time doing that. Okay. Do we think we are ready to put people into breakout rooms?
Yep, BT set up the breakouts and they're ready.
Great. Okay, you're going to have a few minutes, just 5, just to get to know some other people. So highly encourage, turn your camera on, say hello, make sure everybody gets a chance just to say hey and get a sense for who else is in the room. And we'll bring you all back together maybe 17 after the hour. Right-o. So I think hopefully you got to just say hello to somebody, meet somebody new, see an old friend. BT is going to give us a quick overview of the CSTA standards for CS teachers, in part because that's kind of the framework we're using for this ongoing set of meetings. So BT will speak to that, and then we're going to let Dr. Ladner do his presentation.
Sure. Thanks, GT. Hey, everyone, and happy Friday. Thanks for joining today. You may have seen these before. The teacher standards are about 2 years old, and the goal is to delineate the knowledge, skills, and competencies that CS teachers have to effectively and equitably implement CS instruction at the K-12 level. And so, as GT said, we use this as a framework for a lot of things involving teacher professional development and benchmarks for their own kind of ongoing work. And today we're focused on an indicator within Standard 2, Equity and Inclusion. You can go to Advance. So if you've not seen these before, you can access them at csteachers.org/teacher standards. And there's 2 main views, an interactive display that you can click and navigate, show on the next screen, as well as some downloadable PDFs. This is what the interactive display looks like. So you can expand the indicators, and those underlined terms there you can click on, and there are definitions, examples, links, that sort of thing with more information. And so Dr. Ladner is going to be talking about accessibility and how we can make accessibility more of a integral part of our programs. And that is that aligns to the indicator 2E about using accessible instructional materials. And I think one more thing. Can you advance a couple slides, please? Okay, and one more thing here is that there are a lot of resources that align to the teacher standards. Previously, we've shown for PD providers, there are some self-assessment rubrics about to look at coverage as well as sample reflections on that. Another thing that might be useful, though, is for teachers, there are self-assessment checklists and some guidance for setting professional learning goals for teachers, and these might be incorporated into programs. There's many more things that are listed on this list here. You can check them out at csteachers.org/teacherstandards/resources. Okay, and without further ado, I turn over to Dr. Richard Ladner. Thanks so much for joining us.
Richard, I think you're trying to chat and you're on mute.
Thank you.
Happy
I
to
didn't
help.
even notice that, but somebody will advance the slides for me. That'd be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought I'd start with just who am I? I looked through the list of names and I only knew a few people. So next slide. So this is kind of a summary of myself. Since college, I went to a small college in California, St. Mary's College, and then I went to UC Berkeley, got a PhD in mathematics there, and immediately moved to computer science because my dissertation was in the computing, actually in computing, and there were very few computer science departments in 1971. So I went to University of Washington, and I've been there ever since, 51 years. I formally retired, and I'm putting that in air quotes, in 2017, but I'm continuing to do things I like to do, which is exactly what I'm doing today, working with teachers, working with students, and stuff like that. I don't have any classes to teach, of course. I have sort of 4 basic activities that I'm doing. I have this project called Access Computing, which is funded by the National Science Foundation, and that's a project that's been around for about 15 years under a number of grants. And it's the goal is to just get more people with disabilities in computing fields. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. Also, Access CS for All is the sort of K through 12 version of that. And for that, we're working with professional developers like yourselves, teachers, and so on. And then I also do research under CREATE, which is a Center for Accessible Research. And some of my research is in CS education, and one of the projects I worked on over the last few years is Blocks for All, which is a block-based programming environment that is fully accessible for blind people, for people who use switch control, things like that. I'll talk about a lot of that later. Next slide. And you're probably wondering, well, what about my K through 12? What have I done in that space? And I look back over my history since I was in grad school. I realized I've been doing things every single, decade for the last 50 years with K through 12. As a graduate student, I taught math in under-resourced schools around the Bay Area. In the 1980s, I taught Logo, of all things, to deaf students at a middle school in Seattle here. I tutored deaf students in math in a local high school. In 1990s, for 7 years, I did a 1-week Java workshop for students with disabilities during the summer, and that was really exciting. And then in the 2000s, I did a lot more. I created a summer academy, which was pretty intense for deaf and hard of hearing students in computing. And that was 7 years as well. And that was a 9-week program in the summer. So that was pretty intensive. Created the Saturday Computing Experience, which was a Saturday program for 3 years. And we did some development with blind youth at the Blind Youth Slam with it did some programming to develop chatbots, which are more accessible. They talk. And most recently, I did 2 workshops with the Quorum language for high school students and developed some accessible technologies for K through 12 education. So I've been involved with K through 12 education my entire career. Next slide. So I'm just going to start with this basic question: who belongs in CS? And I think all of you believe everyone should be there. It's really something that's so basic. So I like to point out this group of people, all of whom have a disability. They all have PhDs. I know them all, actually. 2 of them were my former students. And in this group, there's, I have to look at my notes, there's 5 deaf and hard of hearing, 8 blind or visually impaired, 5 mobility or speech issues, could be in wheelchairs, for example, and 6 have hidden disabilities. And 1 of them is actually a Turing Award winner, Vin Cerf, who's deaf. So that's like the highest award you can get in computing. And another one there just got a MacArthur Genius Award last year. Josh Mealy, who's on the second row, third from the right. And so anyway, I just, it's not really, I mean, it's not just an equity issue, it's really a quality issue. These are people we need in our field. And so I think that's the way to think about including people with disabilities in computing fields in K through 12. So it's not just a fairness issue. Computing fields need more people with disabilities because of their perspectives and expertise lead to more innovation. In fact, I'm actually writing a paper right now with a student about the contributions of people with disabilities in computing fields and technology, basically, and looking historically and also looking contemporaneously at different innovators. So what about students with disabilities? And I'm sure you're familiar with some of this data. So we can go to the next slide. So there's two groups. There's those students under IDEA, and in the United States, that's about 7.3 million students, ages 3 to 21, and that's about 14% of that population. And then there's also students with disabilities under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and that's about 1.4 million students in K through 12. So that's about 2.7%. So the total was 16.7%, which is a little less than 1/5. And I did a little calculation. I know how many schools there are in the US. So the average is 65 students per school. And typically these students are everywhere. They're not like in ghettos. They're not clustered. Now there are some exceptions. There are schools for the deaf, there are schools for the blind, but they're fairly small. They're a small, very small percentage of those groups. So why don't we go to the next slide? So just looking at IDEA, I think you might be familiar with this, but the biggest disability is learning disabilities. And so that group, in terms of accessibility, it's going to be really different than, say, the bottom group, those students who are blind or visually impaired, which is only 25,000. Now, I do have a lot of affinity for the groups at the bottom, hearing, mobility, and vision, because those are the ones where technology really plays a role and where they need that technology to even access computers in the first place. And the other thing I would like to point out, I should say one more thing. These numbers don't add up to 7.3 million because there are a bunch of other categories I didn't have room to put in there. But these are the ones at the top are the big ones, and the ones at the bottom are the ones that really need more thought in terms of inclusion. And one thing about disability, it intersects all other demographics: gender, race, ethnicity. And if you go back to the picture I showed you earlier, and don't go back in the slides, but if you go back, you'll see that there's about half of those PhDs are women. A goodly number are African-American, Hispanic, and so on. So it's something that's kind of like everywhere. It's not like ghettoized at all. Next slide. So I want to talk about equity and inclusion from the perspective of this teacher standards, and maybe just click to get the animation. Yeah, so there it is. Oops, went too far. So this is the thing we're going to talk about today. I guess this is under, now you can go to the next slide. So standard 2, thank you. I couldn't remember which number it was. So this reads, effective CS teachers proactively advocate for equity and inclusion, underlined, in the CS classroom. They work towards an intentional, equity-focused vision to improve access, engagement, and achievement for all students in CS. And then go to the next slide. And this is the one that we're going to talk about today. Use accessible instructional materials. So it just says evaluate the tools and curricula and leverage resources to improve accessibility for all students. So some of the tools and curricula that are around are like caption videos and screen readers, accessible IDEs that screen readers can actually use. And then resource one that's listed there is the National Center for Accessible Educational Materials, which is part of CAST, which is another organization. It's pretty generic there. It generally, if somebody has an issue with a student with a disability, like a blind student, you'd go there and you wouldn't get that much information. If you can't get it there, contact Access CS for All, and I have that contact information at the end, and we can give you some more direct information. In fact, that just happened yesterday. Somebody called me about accessible mathematics, and I didn't know the answer completely, but I knew somebody who knew the answer, and so I got them together. So what is accessibility anyway? So accessibility at a minimum would mean, if we're in computer science, it means access to the computer, being able to use the computer. And for a blind person, or actually screen readers are also used by people that have reading difficulties or are reading disabled. So it's a way to get information from the computer that's text. It can be read out loud. So the output would be either speech or braille, no visual output. Now, for somebody that has a learning disability related to reading, they would have, in addition to the speech output, the visual output. It might be highlighted on the screen. And the picture there on the right is somebody with a braille keyboard, a braille readout and a regular keyboard. So they can input using the regular keyboard, and they get their output either on their braille display, any kind of text, and they also get it in their headphones as well. So that's a typical blind person's access. There's also something called switch access. So here, somebody has very difficult time using the keyboard, the mouse, anything. They can't even use speech, perhaps. And so their input would be a binary switch. So how does that work? Well, the items on the screen would be scanned and be highlighted as they're scanned. And the rate of scanning will be adjustable depending on the person, how quickly they can react to the thing they want to open or they want to select. And so that's what the switch does. You turn the switch on by, like in that little picture there, by moving his head a little bit to the right, he gets switches, and that does a selection. So you can see that's somewhat error prone. You know, if you're going too fast in the scanning, you might miss something. More recently, and because of some really great advances in computer science, speech input is more likely. And so it's supported quite a bit by, things like Android, Microsoft, and Apple. So speech input is fairly new. It's only in the last 2 years where it's really extensive. And I'm learning about it myself because it's kind of cool the way it works. It's not what you expect, because you want to be efficient when you do your speech input. And you want to, you don't want to have a limited vocabulary. You want to have a very simple way to access the computer. And if you ask me a question later, I can tell you how it works. Also, people have special devices. We already saw the switch there that gentleman is using, but they have, mouse keys, they have joysticks, head mouse. One of our students I work with uses a mouse. So it's a stick, and that he can move with his mouth, and so on. So that basic access to computers is what I'm talking about here. Next slide. So I mentioned this just a little bit, but both Mac and iOS support a lot of accessibility built in. You don't have to buy anything extra. It's already there. There's voiceover for a screen reader. There's switch control, voice control. The switch control and voice control are fairly new, especially voice control. So it's really awesome. For Android, there's TalkBack screen reader. For Windows, there's a screen reader called Narrator. It's not as good as voiceover, but it's pretty good. But there's also third-party screen readers. JAWS and NVDA are the most famous ones. And the cool thing about NVDA is it's free. JAWS is like $1,000, and NVDA is just about as good. Certainly for K through 12, I think it's very good. JAWS would be maybe a more professional screen reader. By the way, this NVDA, it came into existence. In fact, part of my study I was talking about earlier about innovators is the two people that developed NVDA were blind themselves. They did the development of this whole screen reader, which is not an easy task. Requires in-depth programming and getting down into the operating system. Next slide. So I think the key observation I want to make is that computer applications and websites are not automatically accessible. They have to be designed to be so. So these tools that I just showed you earlier, they're useless if the application isn't built to be accessible in the first place. If it's not built to be accessible, then those access tools are not useful. So, and I would say 95% of websites are not accessible. A lot of K through 12 computer applications, things as simple as Scratch is not accessible, screen reader accessible. And they haven't done anything about it for a long time. You can ask me about Scratch later. But so I think it's particularly bad in K through 12, how little is accessible. So let's move on. So also there's accessible pedagogy. And the classic one, and some of you may have heard of Universal Design for Learning. And there's a website, the CAST website, that sort of gives you sort of the big picture and how to implement it. But the way I think about it, it takes into account different ways of learning, alternate ways of conveying information and doing assessment for teachers, having plenty of scaffolding and clarity so that things are not ambiguous. And then project-based learning is really a popular way, making sure the student is really engaged in what they're doing is to have it be their project. And then some basic stuff that's universal design is making sure that any videos you use are captioned. So this would be good for everybody. Or they have video transcripts or both. And also they could be audio described videos. So audio described would be an extra level of accessibility for blind people who can't see the video. Next slide. So what can you do? Well, promote the adoption of accessible curricular tools and pedagogy. So, and I'm not going to go into detail into any of these, but they can be, this stuff exists. I mentioned a moment ago that much of stuff that's out there for K through 12, as basic as Scratch and Scratch Junior, are not accessible. But the quorum language, which is a high-level object-oriented language that has a lot of libraries, is accessible. And my colleague, Andreas Stefik, who I work with very closely, is the inventor of quorum. And it's being adopted. It's basically been adopted by all schools for the blind around the nation, but it should be adopted even further than that. There's Swift Playgrounds, that's from Apple, and that's accessible. Blocks for All, which we developed at University of Washington, is also accessible. And then all the UDL practices. So just adopt those and you'll have something that's more accessible. Next slide. So the other thing that's kind of bothers me quite a bit is data that for your PDs, I don't know if you're collecting data on students. This data on the right is data that's collected by the California, was it CS for CA or CA for CS? I can't remember which it is. And they collect data on gender and I can't read it, but race and ethnicity. That's it. So they don't know anything about students with disabilities that are taking computer science in California. They don't know about 504 students. They don't know about IDEA students. They don't even know about English language learners or free and reduced lunch, which is those students in poverty. And about half the students in the United States are on free and reduced lunch, but we don't know how they're doing very well. In at least California didn't have that data. So you can encourage people that do collect data to collect data. This is all institutional data. It's data that schools have. And so it's not like you have to ask a student or their parents about this. That's already known. So this data should be collected and looked at. Somebody writes, it could be difficult to gather data on students with disability due to privacy policies. Yes, I agree. I think everything is private. If you ask somebody about their race, that's private. But you're not asking about their race. You're only asking institutional data. So there's no names. It's just how many. So it still can be done. And it is done. I think 19 states have reported data on 504 and IDEA to the code.org and CSTA and ESEP publication that comes out every year, the state of computer science in the United States. So it is done. So maybe it's harder than other things. You don't want to violate privacy, that's for sure, but it can be done. So for you that are doing PDs, and some of you are, some teachers actually have disabilities. So you want to be welcoming and accessible to those teachers. In fact, I know a bunch of teachers who are deaf. I know some that are blind. So when you have your PD, make sure your registration asks if a participant needs any disability related accommodations and provide those accommodations. So you might need to put it in your budget because some of the accommodations actually cost money. For example, sign language interpreters. So keep that in mind and if I get my way, there'll even be more teachers with disabilities because they're getting into computer science, and Access CS for All and Access Computing are paving that way. Next slide. So this is just some resources I put together, and these are all active links. And so one thing I didn't put in writing there, but this Access CS for All email, that's a place where you can just ask any question about an individual that you have an issue with. And you could give that to teachers and your PDs as a place. Well, I have the student and I don't know what to do. Then we might know, or we might know somebody who does know and can help you out. And so that's one of the resources that Access CS for All provides. Okay, so I think that's all. These slides are available to everybody, so you can sort of explore those resources. Is that my last one? Oh, questions and discussions. Yeah, right. We wrote some prompts here. GT, you want me to go through these prompts, or do you want to go through them?
Why don't you can go through them, Richard, and then everybody just think in a moment you're going to be placed in a breakout room where you're going to talk about these with other curriculum and PD providers. So you won't have to answer all four, but Richard, why don't you read them off and then
I'll read them off. Sure.
Yeah.
So team expertise about accessibility. Is your team, your PD team, your teachers, your teacher of teachers, knowledgeable about the needs of students with disabilities and how to design a PD and curriculum with accessibility in mind? How has your team built the capacity, or what opportunities exist for the future? So you might not have it yet, but how would you sort of develop that in your PD? And by the way, that's, National Science Foundation is funding Access Computing to help you. So we're a resource for that. Tooling and curriculum. I love that. I never use the word tooling. That's tooling and curriculum accessibility. I didn't write this. GT wrote this. Is the curriculum or tooling designed to be accessible? For example, the programming environments or the lessons and resources. How does your program currently address the needs of students with disabilities who may be in your classrooms? What opportunities are there for your curriculum or tools to improve going forward? So you might not have it yet. In fact, one of the code.org, all their curriculum materials, they're not very accessible, and they know it. And I think they want to change too and do better. So the big kahuna is moving in this direction. Addressing accessibility in PDs. How does your PD program guide teachers through supporting students with disabilities? Is accessibility part of your PD? And again, we can help you do that if it's not there yet. Accessible PD program. Is your PD program designed to be accessible to support teachers with disabilities? That was the point I made in a previous slide. So those are the 4 prompts, and GT will tell you what's going to happen next. And thank you all.
Let's first give some virtual snaps or a round of applause to Dr. Ladner. We're extremely grateful that he spent time putting together this presentation to share his expertise, decades of experience. Thank you. And now, most of the rest of the time that you spend here is going to be spent in conversation. That was a great presentation. I think we'll still try to give you enough time to do a really good debrief of it, and then we will still take a break. So we'll probably push that break back just a little bit. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get put in a breakout room. You should already be, you have the link to that slide deck. BT just put it in again. You should use that as notes. Whatever room you're put in, just go to that slide for that room. And you don't need to talk about all 4 prompts. Also, if your conversation starts deviating away from accessibility, nobody's going to come and wrap you on the wrists or anything like that. But you're going to have time to have sort of a broader conversation about any topic you want later as well. So pick one of these 4 topics that feels most interesting or relevant, or pick a few of them, talk about them, take some notes. We're going to come back together and share our conversations. Again, we know that many groups have room to grow here or learn, and so we're just trying to do that together. What do we think, Amanda, BT, 20 minutes maybe for this conversation? So we'll do that. We'll bring us all back together maybe 10 after the hour. We'll have a quick debrief, and then we'll take a quick break. And then after that, we'll go to the unconference. So are we ready to put people into breakout rooms? Awesome. Wishing you all lovely conversations. Take notes, and we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Dude, I don't know if we talked about this. Are you up? I know you're recovering from a cold. We've just heard my voice a lot. Are you down to run a brief share out of what the different rooms talked about?
Yeah, do we want to just have like one person from each group kind of share something that they did?
I think pretty standard. Yeah, we'll just do that for a few minutes, but get new voices on here. Yeah.
So group 1, anyone within that group willing to share something that you talked about?
Do people remember what group they're in? I don't remember the number I was in.
I think we were group 1, Richard. I think I'm going to volunteer Dawn, but Dawn, don't feel like you have to.
We had a really nice discussion. We were lucky enough to have Richard in the group, and he was able to elaborate a little bit more on the quorum language. And we talked about, ways of possibly being able to get it out to as many folks as possible. The possibility of trying to work it into what we do at CodeHS and just accessibility in general, and how to, be able to give access to these resources to as many students and teachers that have disabilities as possible. And I mentioned how I feel a special draw to this because I started my teaching career in a special ed classroom for years before moving into a high school and teaching computer science and other subjects.
Appreciate it.
Can I add a little bit? So I felt very fortunate to be in the room with, there were 3 people from Code HS in the room, along with Abigail. And so just talking to CodeHS and looking at their website, they do have a lot about accessibility, but it's in progress. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, it's already there. And so that's really good to see. But I think the one bit of advice I gave to them was that if you really want to be accessible, you're probably not going to be able to do it totally in-house. It's good to get some, you know, an outside expert come in who is an accessibility expert to do like an audit, and they can help. But it was good to see that CodeHS they're already serious about doing accessibility, and they have made some progress.
Thank you. What about a volunteer or a voluntold from group 2?
I'll talk with group 2 unless somebody else wants to jump in. We talked about some of the challenges in trying to do it like just from our sort of pedagogical side or educational side, if we don't feel that there's this sort of like org-wide kind of systemic push toward accommodating this, you know, and towards like making everything accessible and eliminating those points of disability, because it's, you know, especially in computer science, I feel like so many of our curricula are, and the learning experience are really mediated through a lot of the technology that we're using. So what GT I think was referring to as the tooling, if that's what you meant, GT. Yeah, okay, great. So I think because of that, we felt a lot of, you know, it's kind of exploring those challenges and sort of the pathway on our side of, do we try to do as much as we can with what we really have ownership of, or do you keep trying to push and advocate, you know, like where do you really focus your efforts in doing that? And even from the PD experience, that if you've designed, if you're PDing for a learning experience that is not designed to be accessible from the ground up, or just is not accessible, then how accessible could that PD even be? Because they're going to have to interact with that learning experience itself. So just trying to, this is really a systemic thing that's hard to think about just within the context of PD. And then the second half of the discussion was really interesting because it was somebody brought up, I forgot, maybe it was Kathy, somebody brought up that well, what's going on in these other courses? Like, how are they solving these issues? Are they doing better than we are? Hopefully they're not doing worse, but are, you know, so like, what are the solutions for these subjects that have been around for quite a while? And are, you know, what are things that may have an analog or that we could just wholesale copy? And then another aspect of that is other subjects that maybe are more in line with the state testing, or things that schools consider like, we're going to be evaluated on this. Are they going to be getting access to these resources that we need around accessibility, whether that's a para or wraparound services, that we just won't get access in the computer science classroom because they've got to prioritize the, you know, like the core classes, or the things, basically not even the core classes, but just the things where there's some sort of like statewide accountability and testing, and it's matched, you know, it's directed, you know, to funding. So those were kind of the two sides of what we were talking about.
Appreciate that. What about someone from group 3? There's some good questions in the chat. We added for a birds of a feather in a little bit to continue the discussion on accessibility. So maybe that's a place where we can continue those conversations.
I'll jump in there. I think we were group 3. We had some really great talks around, you know, developing accessible PDs and programs and that kind of thing. And one of the biggest takeaways we believe was, you know, being open to suggestions and critiques and notes for improvement along the way, and you know, being open to learning new things, even if that's going back and retooling things that we've always done or done in the past to make what we're doing in the future as accessible as possible, and for our own personal growth as well.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that as well a little bit, and how it's sometimes difficult when some people just don't want to talk about accessibility or equity or whatever. Like it's weird being in this field when people don't want to grow. But we also talked about like how some tools are accessible in some ways and less accessible in other ways, and kind of that continuum of accessibilities for different needs, whether it's disabilities or just like age, like reading levels, things like that. So I enjoyed our conversation in our group, but anyone in group 4 want to add to that, or anyone in group 5 want to share what they discussed? Everyone's quiet. That's okay. Maybe there's not a group 5. So I think next up we have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and do some birds of a feather. So GT, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before that, or just everyone set a 5-minute timer.
Now, I'm currently seeing that it is 12:18 in Seattle, so why don't we get back here by 23 after the hour. This is just like a stretch break. Go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do. You can turn your cameras off, and at 23 we'll come back with instructions for that birds of a feather. Send you to your birds of a feather. All right. Welcome back. Short break. Only 30 minutes more, basically. So I'm sharing my screen again. The in the chat, you can get a link to this slide deck. It's where we're working. This point, this is just conversation time. We tried to seed these prompts with topics that we thought people would want to talk about. So if you want to keep talking about a topic, just copy and paste a star next to the topic you think you're interested in. I'm wondering if we fold, I think Diane, you typed 6, maybe we fold 6 into 7 just because we only have like 20 odd people, so I don't want too many rooms. Does that sound okay to you? Like, what can we learn about accessibility from other subject areas?
I don't know if that's just something to research, because it just kind of came up like, what the heck do other people do to do this well? I've never been part of another subject area outside of STEM tech.
Yeah, I know something about that, so I can
Okay.
I can join that group.
Why don't we say that Richard Ladner's definitely going to go to whatever this room 7 ends up becoming. We also, just broadly speaking, infusing equitable teaching practices, differentiating and making accommodations in PD. So if you want to just go to that deck and put a star next to the topic you think you want to talk about, we're only going to do this for maybe 30 seconds to just make sure that you don't end up in a room on your own, basically. And then BT, will people, they should be able to pick which room they want to go to. The options should just come up for them. Okay. So we'll just give everybody another 30 seconds. Go to the slide deck. We're in slide 51. Put a star next to the topic you're interested in. And this is just to make sure that we don't send you to a room on your own. I'll give you all a few more moments to do that while you're doing it. You don't have to, but we would love for you to take notes because we can't be in every conversation. So if you do end up going to a room, if you can start your conversation just by getting someone to offer to take notes, that would be great. It is, though, going to be basically free-flowing conversation time. We know it's nice just to talk to other people who think about doing curriculum in PD. And I will say, if you don't want to keep talking about accessibility because there's other topics of interest or things on your mind, that's the point. Okay, I'm seeing 4 rooms with stars. BT, why don't we make those 4? And just as a norm, if the conversation starts floating somewhere else, let that happen. So we're going to be doing infusing equitable teaching practices, pre-service, current challenges and future plans with virtual online PD, and then a continuing accessibility conversation. So those are going to be the 4 rooms. BT said he's ready to send those off. So those should show up on your screen in a moment. Go to those rooms, have a great conversation, take notes, and we'll all come back together to wrap up in maybe like 20, 25 minutes. BT, Amanda, do you think you're going to hang out here?
I thought we were supposed to switch and change rooms, so.
Oh, gotcha.
I don't know if we agreed on a facilitator for this last conversation, did we? I think not. Here's what we'll do. We got 10 minutes. We have some announcements. We don't want to go too long. I actually realized in our room, I hadn't even been taking notes. Maybe that happened in your room. So I was like going through and trying to put in some comments, but let's maybe really briefly just have somebody speak to conversation in each room. So even just like a 30-second high level, overview, and then we can, you can always go read the notes. I'll commit to putting a couple more thoughts in our group. So room 1, infusing equitable teaching practices throughout PD. Does somebody think they can just give me like the 30-second version of your conversation?
Sure. In a nutshell, 2 of us we're part of this. We're here to learn, and we're at the beginning stages of, learning accessibility. Bringing, making our work more accessible, and so we discussed the challenges that we have faced so far, and watching our organizations evolve to become more accessible in many different levels over time. So it was a great conversation.
Awesome. Did we do room 3 pre-service educators? Yes. Somebody want to speak to that really quickly?
All right. Yeah, you go. No, I was waiting for you to unmute, so you go.
I was just going to say, I think we decided that figuring out the best way to teach teachers that don't know anything about computer science is very challenging and a kind of polarizing and there's a balance to be found between giving out of the box turnkey curriculum that they follow or that the students do step by step on their own versus creating some type of curriculum that is based in discovery and inquiry, which is hard to do if you don't know what you're helping or facilitating students to discover and inquire about.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm not allowed to talk, so somebody from my room, can you briefly talk about our conversation for virtual or online PD, current challenges and future plans?
Sure, I'll do that. So we talked about how we're kind of in this weird space right now where some things are happening in person, some are happening online, and we're kind of still developing for both settings. And how do we translate the moves that you would do in one space into the moves that you would do in the other one, and still have it be meaningful and interactive and engaging. So that way we can make sure that the best of both worlds are, present and valuable for teachers.
Awesome. And the accessibility room, why don't you wrap us up? How did your conversation go?
We were just picking Richard's brain.
I
Great.
think Amanda took a lot of notes.
Pick anything to say. You have 30 seconds of airtime. It doesn't have to be every topic. It does seem like you had a lot of great conversations. You have 25 seconds of airtime.
Amanda, you took the notes.
Why would we put anybody on the spot? We did puzzle over that whole thing about, if you don't start out making things accessible to start with, you're having a heck of a time retrofitting. It's definitely not a good place to be. And Richard was pointing out that the internet and everything else started out all as text-based and perfectly accessible. So how did we get into this mess when we had guidelines all along? And we really don't know how other subject areas do good PD that is truly accessible, whether they really do or not. There's lots of people working in other subject areas to make various things accessible. And then we bemoaned the fact that Scratch is such an amazing and wonderful tool, and yet still continues to not be private or accessible. But supposedly they're actually reaching out now and talking like that's something they're going to do.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Diane. And a quick call out to Diane, who has been part of the group putting these together. I don't know that we've given you the airtime that you duly deserve, as well to Perry. So we're gonna, thanks to that whole group that's worked together to get this series going. I think we have only 3 minutes. So it looks like we have some additional resources on slide 57 and then a couple of announcements. Maybe I'll let Dr. Ladner or Richard, did you put those additional resources there? And you're on mute.
I don't think I did, but somebody did. Maybe I did. I don't know. So we have these videos that they're about an hour long to an hour and a half, and teacher to teacher videos. And remember I said earlier that we had worked with teachers at special schools, and we got some of those teachers to talk about what they do with their students. And so this is pretty detailed. The one on blind and visually impaired is Gina Fugate, is one of the equity fellows, CSTA equity fellows. And the one that was done on learning disabilities was done by Sarah Cyrus, who was a equity fellow last year, the year before.
Awesome.
So I highly recommend that. And you can use these in your PD. I mean, if you wanted to. And I was thinking the way you might use them is this would be homework, you know what I mean? And then you can come in and in the PD, have some, prompts and things to talk about in the PD.
Awesome. So these slides are yours, a wealth of resources available. Amanda or BT, do you want to talk about this in-person summit we have for everybody?
Sure, I can say something, and BT, feel free to jump in, or anyone if I miss anything. But we are having an in-person summit. So exciting. We get to see some of you in person, hopefully. during the CSTA conference. So hopefully most of you are coming to the conference. We would love to see you there. And then the summit is on the first day of the conference, like before the opening ceremonies, Thursday, July 14th, 12:30 to 4:30 Central Time in Chicago. There will be a free lunch provided for everyone who comes. So that's very exciting because you won't be getting lunch during the rest of the conference. So we're excited that we can feed you during this summit. And the audience is, as always, people who design K-12 computer science PD and curriculum at scale. Feel free to invite your colleagues, friends, whoever that you want to invite as well. We'll send you the registration form. And the goals for this are, again, to build community, share best practices, solve challenges together, and exchange ideas. We haven't finalized the schedule or the plans exactly yet for the summit. So in our registration form right now, we do have space for you to send us some of your ideas if there's particular topics or things that you want to talk about, especially since it's an in-person format versus a virtual format.
And I think that registration link is right there in the slides. So if this is something you're interested in doing, and we hope you are, just register and definitely share it out. We've had some really good ones of these in the past.
And BT put the registration link in the chat, and he also just put in the chat a super quick feedback survey from today's session. If you could take just a minute to fill that out. And the end of that survey also links to the registration for the summer summit. So you can do one and then the other.
We got one more slide. Amanda basically said these things. So there's a survey. We're so glad that you all decided to spend your afternoon with us. This has been, as always, an awesome discussion. Tell other people who are designing curriculum and PD at scale to come to these. Everything, all the resources are going to be at that link at the top. So you can go to past presentations as well and see those conversations. And yeah, we just hope we'll see you on the 14th. Thanks so much. Do take that survey. And it sounds like, Richard, you have a thing.
Yeah, just one last thing. So
yeah,
you know, I'm very fortunate to meet the people from Boot Up, from Code HS, and of course, Diane from CS Matters, you know. And I was wondering if there are any other PD providers there that would like to talk to me privately. I've got to talk to all those sort of in these small groups, and I would like to talk to everybody. So is there a way that I could get all the people here who have a PD to contact me?
I have two solutions to that. One, on that link that says csteachers.org page PD Provider Summit is the contact information for anybody who's ever gone to one of these. And if your information isn't there, feel free to add it. So we're trying to do some community development. Two, Richard, you could just put your email in the chat right now if you want people to reach out to you, or we don't have to like close.
It's on one of the slides. It's on one of the slides.
So your email's on the slide. So it sounds like you're more than happy to basically do some consultation with teams, or at least talk to them. So like people should do that. And then I don't think we have to close down this call. I could hang out. I want to let people go, but if you want to hang out for a moment, people could hang out.
I do have a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Why don't we formally say we did it? It was a virtual PD Provider Summit. It was awesome. Thank you so much. And folks who want to stick around and talk to Dr. Ladner, let's do that. And the rest of you feel no guilt about going to do the rest of your lives. Thanks for spending a couple hours with us.
Good afternoon.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.